My name's Robert C. My daddy's Robert E. Uncle Bob Curren is Robert C. And then Senator Robert Curren from the state of Tennessee. I believe he was a senator for the Confederate government, representing the state of Tennessee, which we're no kin, but we like the name. I got the name Sam when I was quite young. One cousin of mine, she was older than I am, started calling me Sam. My mother was a good woman, black hair, coal black hair, dark skin, dark eyes. My mother was named Sarah Frances Massey. My mother was Creek, Choctaw, and French. I was born December of 1936 during the Great Depression. I was born at home in Shades Valley. I have one sister. I was 2.5, 3 years older than she was. And it was rough times. People had a hard time in those days. Very few automobiles and no electricity. They hadn't run the power lines out in the rural areas at the time. I remember when I was a child, at times you had a large forest land, had plenty of original timber, never been cut. And I remember a bird, the owls. I always watched them and try to mess with them and flipping rocks at them and throwing rocks at them, see what they'll do. And I got close to a nest. I never will forget this. And the woodpecker, the jaybird come down and pecked me. And I got flogged by a mockingbird once. And owls was lined up on a tree limb. I remember that real plain. And owls that do their eyes like that, look at you. They would not fly, the little ones and the big ones. And I remember that real good. I remember squirrels. They were very scary. And I remember gathering American chestnuts. I remember the hickory nut, the walnut, beech nuts. People used to go get beech nuts out of the forest. Persimmons, honey locusts, I remember everything. That was one of the things always stuck with me. And it's sad to go through the woods now and see where the greedy timber cutters have cut the big hickory trees, the scaly barks, and sold everything for money. They destroyed the forest land. And the animals got to eat. They don't realize that. The animals have to have these crops to survive on. At one time, somebody was going through the woods cutting dogwood trees down. They were making thread spools, sell them to a company to make thread spools with. But going in the woods, gathering chestnuts and persimmons, anything like that grow wild food, we went in the woods and got them. All of them used to. Now people don't do that. Nobody goes in to eat nothing. Younger people today tell you better watch out eating that. That's poison. I've had that told. I remember many things. Yes, I done work, hoed and plant. I hoed the field, the gardens, and I helped pick. And then I helped turn the land over and help plant other things. And after one crop left, we planted another crop. I remember that real well. And everybody had a garden. It's rare to see one today where I was raised up at. We grew corn and string beans, squash, pumpkins, sweet potatoes, and we grew a lot of pumpkins and cashaws. That was the number one crop back then. My mother's people loved pumpkins. Just on the livestock we had in those days were hogs, pigs, maybe one or two of them. And my daddy would kill the hogs and scrape them, have hot water to pour over them out of a wash pot, and put them in a meat box, salted them down, and then after they cured, pulled all the moisture out of it. He smoked them in a smokehouse with green hickory. It took a long time to smoke them. I remember that as plain as yesterday. I remember how to do it. I fished a lot, and I hunted during the season, and I also fished in the wintertime. I remember that real good. I know how to make traps to catch quail. I know how to make traps to catch rabbits. An old-time relative, uncle of mine, it was passed down to me how to hunt deer and kill deer without a gun. Back in those days, it was a rail fence, and old Gilt would watch where the deer jumped the fence. He would go and dig a hole, he would slant a sharp pine log out. It was fat pine, and he would sharpen it down to the needle point, have it thin, and stick it up where that deer would jump and land every time where he would get back on the ground and run away. And it would jab through that deer's chest and kill him. His little dog would run the deer back. He had a little dog following him around everywhere he goes. He was a full-blood Indian. I grew up in Shades Valley, near the Parkwood community, Hopewell community. And in those days, it was a wild wilderness, but there was a lot of farming going on in between the wooded section, and then you go out and you go through big, huge, several miles of nothing but woods. Clean water, springs. It was a perfect paradise to live in those days. Everybody heated with wood in the wintertime, and the trees were gigantic trees. You don't see many of them today, but there's still a few of them left. I noticed that here past year or two. And it's sad to see a timber company that went up Shades Creek and cut the ancient trees. Some of them had markings from the Indian times on them, giant beech trees. Some had dates on them. They went back to 1700s. There was one said Pistole, or a pistola, and it was a picture of a flintlock. Barely could see it. And they cut the tree down and let it fall in the creek. And it washed away and decayed. And today, that creek has cut through all the way to the bluff and destroyed that land from unwise timber cutting. All for $1. No farming. People just live there. I call it the existence. And they don't hunt. Very few people hunt. There's nothing like the people I knew long ago. They change everything. There used to be some whiskey making went on in that area, a lot of it, in fact. And you don't even hear that. They're too lazy to make liquor, too lazy to pick cotton, too lazy to even hoe. In a garden, the time change. I know all of us, my Native American ancestry, I knew it, heard it mentioned before, but what made me aware of it, I began to take pride in it when nobody else would. Nobody wouldn't even claim it. Said, we know it, don't tell it. I remember those days. Because Alabama had racial laws at the time, and the racial laws might include Indian people, even mixed-blood Indian people. And I talked to my uncle one time about it, and he told me. He knew I showed an interest in it. He took me under his wing and began to teach me things, and I showed an interest. During that time, my mother and my family began to accept it, and some became tribal members. I remember we became tribal members, and we joined a group up in North Alabama. We had to prove our ancestry. We got a card by blood, and it took us a while to get one like that. They had to send some more paperwork in, but it was well documented. And I'm descendant of the Jacobs, some of the Walls, the Nation, Fixico, I don't know who else, Fishers, Gibsons. All of those are my kin people. Some of the Gibsons settled among the Porch Creek. And the Cahaba band, old Gip brought our people from around Chambers in Russell County and Tallapoosa County into the Cahaba River Basin. And they lived near where Shades Creek run into Cahaba River, on up toward the mountain, rough country. They hunted bears also. My mother's family was a very old family. The name, she was a Massey, was originally French name that intermarried with the Indian people. And our oldest, the direct line of the name, the Frenchman married an Indian woman. It's well documented, and it was something like Arbika, Shawnee, Cherokee people. And she was born somewhere on the borders of Georgia and North Carolina. She married, her name was Mary Nation. She married James Massey. She was born, Mary Nation Massey was born May the 1st, 1794, because the year you go barefooted is the first day of May. So they assumed it was the first day of May, 1794. She died in 1875, 81 years old. And I remember people that knew her, that actually seen and talked to her. She was a distant woman, extremely dark, never come out of the room. When company was there, she would stay in another room to herself or go outside. I have a picture of her taken before her death. And she was in looked like a goldenrod field. And it's behind where she is buried at. Identified the field. I remember people that knew her real good, and they were born in the 1850s. And I remember an old Black Creek woman that knew her. I used to go see her all the time, sit and talk. And then my other lineage was a Caldwell. He was an Indian trader among some of the tribes here, and he married an Indian woman, and they had children, and that intermarried with Doc Massey. Doc was not Joshua, and Doc is the same person. He had two names. That was Mary Nation James Massey's, one of the younger sons. He was a sergeant in the Confederate Army, and he died in 1907. And then Doc had a son named Jim Carson. Jim married strong, pure Creek blood as you can get in Alabama at that time. Some French blood. They all intermarried with the French and the Indian. And the Caldwell were mountain people that had mixed with the French. And I don't know much about the Caldwells, and then when James Carson married, he married a Walls, And her mother was a Jacobs, and her name was Sarah. Sarah was her, Caroline, I believe, was her name. And she had a sister that died young, and then had a brother to go west. He never come back. He left right after the Civil War. But in 1918 or 19, he came back to Alabama. And when he got back here in Alabama, he didn't know the place. And he asked somebody, what's the name of this town? They said it was Bessemer. He said, I got 10 miles to go from here. How do I get to... And then he told them that I would just walk. And he walked, and his 2 daughters in Texas came and kept writing him, come on back home. And he went back home, and he died about 1920, 21. And that's the end of my family, really. And then my mother's mama was French Choctaw, the Creek and Choctaw mixed up. And there's some ancestry there that goes way back in the French times, and around old St. Stephen's, Alabama. I did hear her speak of St. Stephen's, Slidell, Louisiana, and she spoke a lot about Slidell. And I remember she would speak about Cajun, Choctaw, and Creoles. That's who they associated with. Never too much with Anglo people. They like I am. I never could get along very well with the Anglo-Saxon race. So that's why I like to pick my own friends. I always run with the Indian people. Everywhere I went, when I was coming up, I prefer their friendship. And I still do. I remember many Black Creek people. They were descendants of Creek Indians by blood or Creek Indian by ownership. Slavery time, many black people took refuge in the Creek Nation and the Seminole Nation. And they were free as long as they was there. The Americans couldn't come in and take them away and put them back in slavery. The Creeks protected them. All they had to pay was that Creek or Muskogee man was a bushel of corn or something a year, whatever he wanted to give him. And they were protected, had land, their own villages. And then I have knew many Black Creeks by blood. And I remember the Black Creek, they kept the old customs going, where the ones that kept mixing with the white, they wanted to be white. They went out and into the world and tried to be like a white man, and the blood eventually disappeared out of them. And their culture altogether, they forsake their culture, but the Black Creek retained his. Even though he was a slave, he kept the Creek custom. They was allowed to participate in a busquita, all the ceremonies that they wanted to. The Black Creek, if he was born of a Creek mother, he was a Creek citizen. He had a clan. He could always go into the green corn ceremony. And then you got the other Black Creek that was pure African. I knew some of them. I remember several of them all together. Old Hager, she was pure African, but she's a Black Creek too, because her family, I guess it would be her parents. She was so old when I knew her. She died in the early 40s, 1940s. And she was skinny, short, little lady. And I remember Maggie. She gave me her mother or grandmother's pipe. Maggie was very old. She had the color of an Indian. She was African, maybe a little touch of French and Creek, Muskogee blood. She always retained it. She was good on herbs. She knew a lot of the old customs of the Creek, the superstitions, and she was very superstitious on ghosts and spirits. Maggie was, I remember she was very good on plants and different things and superstitions of them. I'm not going to mention the plants that'll go in our book. I don't want the information out. It'll go in the black book here. And I remember Maggie saying, the pumpkin, you have the pumpkin, and you have the sweet potato, and you have the collard green. You can live in the onions, the multiplying onions. They call them shallots, and you can live good all winter without having to go to the store. I remember that. Don't forget to grow your corn and peas, and dry your string beans. String them up and dry them. Then you got a good living. You can always get out and get your squirrel or rabbit or possum, she would say. I remember that real well. And I remember Lucille and Nancy, they were always Black Creek. Nancy sort of looked like she could have had Indian blood in her, but her sister didn't. She looked pure African. Lucille. Let's see, Nancy Stewart and Lucille Page. They were sisters. And all these Black Creeks that I once knew, they're all gone now. My son run into one coming from North Carolina. He told me, said she was Black Creek. He pointed her out, but I couldn't run that good to go catch up with her. And I wanted to talk to her. I hadn't seen a Black Creek in many years. But I did work with one, but he don't know it, but I know it, where he come from and all. I knew some of his background. I got to go see Will when I get back up that way. He come out of Coosa County. I remember many years ago, it was very common to see a Black Creek. One used to go to Bessemer and sell belts on Saturday on the streets. He had them strung over him. He worked leather. He was a high degree of Creek blood. I remember him. I remember a high degree of whites and French Scotch Indians, too. I remember a man had a gold mines on Blue Creek in Chilton County, near Shady Grove Church. Mr. Calloway, his wife was a good degree of Creek blood, and I asked her one day, what kind of Indian, you native right here or Oklahoma? She said, my husband was working the railroad, met her in Oklahoma, and they eventually married. She was Muskogee Creek. And I remember the Campbell family descended of Menawa. Katie Weed, I remember them speaking of them. And as a Campbell man resided somewhere around Coosa County, and him and his family stayed behind. He had married, I believe, the sister of Menawa. And one of that family, later generation, married a daughter or granddaughter of Menawa that stayed behind. And there's Red Mouth stayed behind. I've seen some of them descendants before. Wokokai Clark's daughter stayed behind. She was one half. In that area, there was over 100 creeks stayed behind in the old Upper Creek Nation. And the majority of them went to Oklahoma. They just tore the nation and families and people apart. The United States government done it. They're guilty of it, and they can't deny it. I know it, they know it. Everybody knows. I write about it. I try to bring it out in the open. And I remember all these Indian people. I've seen people of Indian blood that looked full of blood, didn't even know the tribe they were from. One told me one time that he was a Caucasian Indian. Who ever heard of a Caucasian tribe of Indians?